What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Ice Earn podcast, the podcast talking all things PWHL. My name is Heidi, and I'm a huge hockey fan, but full disclosure, I am a member of the Fleet's crew. We had some barn burners this week, 2 games at 2 different gardens, and some extracurriculars as always. So let's jump right into it. We're going to start with the first game on Saturday, April 4th, which was Vancouver in Minnesota. Talk about barn burners. We saw 11 different goals in this game. So the majority of what I have to talk about in this game are all of the goals. It started off really quickly too, and not from the team that you would have expected. Sarah Nurse started off the scoring a minute and 18 seconds into the first period. Obviously, expect big things from Sarah Nurse, but Vancouver has been struggling all over the place. Meanwhile, Minnesota always has goal scorers, so this is not the start that I would have expected. This goal was thanks in large part to Sophie Jakes, who had a blast from the top of the zone in her usual spot that Sarah Nurse had a reaching tip on just outside the crease. A very skilled tip compared to some that you just see kind of bounce off a stick. This one was very carefully guided, and it was at least 1.5 feet, 2 feet or more away from Sarah Nurse's body itself. So good on her to have the hand-eye coordination there. Weirdly, it did take Minnesota quite a bit to catch up. At 9 minutes and 5 seconds, it's Grace Zumwinkle who gets on the board for Minnesota. Absolute hell of a season for her. This play started with Jinsey Rose on the blue line, passing it to Kelly Panic, who was on the goal line, so high-low. And then Panic, without even looking, goes backwards pass towards Zumwinkle, who was on the opposite side of the crease, and Zumwinkle just had to tap it in. Easy goal for Zumwinkle. Unbelievable play for Kelly Panic. And if I'm not mistaken, that's Jinsey Rose's first point with the Frost. We have another lull in scoring for about, another 8 minutes-ish. And then it's Katie Knoll who strikes again for Minnesota. This one was thanks to a turnover in the neutral zone for Vancouver. Panic gets the puck to Steckline, who carries it into the offensive zone. She took a shot that just barely squeaked through Mashmeyer's legs, and by then, Knoll, who was the trailer, had crashed the net and was there to just help it over the goal line to make the score 2-1. Vancouver had a very quick answer for this one, though. Off the face-off, it's Teresa Vinisheva with the puck into their offensive zone, stick handling right down Main Street, and then a wrist shot that went bar down blocker side. Holy cow, was that a slick goal. That's the Teresa Vinisheva that I have personally been waiting for all year long. I wish we got more of that in this game specifically, but I'll take it against pretty much any other team because I love watching hockey like that. And because this period wasn't quite entertaining enough, Britta Curl took a roughing penalty for knocking Ashton Bell headfirst into her own goalpost, completely unnecessarily. The puck was nowhere near them. And so Vancouver went to the power play. Personally, I'm not expecting anything out of Vancouver's power play or most other teams' power plays at this point. So the fact that Sophie Jakes got on the board next was almost completely shocking to me. Only 17 seconds into the power play, she took a wrist shot from the top of the right circle, once again kind of in her wheelhouse there, that snuck through traffic and went in just over Hensley's glove. Opening up the second period, Jen Gardner got to work early again for the Golden Eyes, making it 4-2. The Frost failed to clear the puck out of their zone, and Claire Thompson kept it in for the Golden Eyes. She sent it across to her trusty D partner, Sophie Jakes. Jakes took a pretty innocent-looking shot at net, and Gardner was there just in front of the crease to redirect it enough to get it by Hensley. Another great positioning play for the Golden Eyes. I do have to say that this one has obviously a turnover in your own zone is going to be difficult to defend, but it is kind of on the Frost defense. And even if you're just looking at the final score of this game, you'll know that defense was almost non-existent in this game. It was goalie on goalie, and neither of them were having a great day. 9 minutes later, the Frost strike back. There was another neutral zone turnover by the Golden Eyes that the Frost come away with. Coyne Schofield to Zumwinkle. Zumwinkle took a backhand shot that rebounded. Batherson was right there to pick up the loose change and slam it home. This one, I do have to note, was reviewed for goaltender interference as Panic and Bard got tangled up in front of the crease and ran into Maschmeyer, which made Maschmeyer unable to make the save. But to my eye and to the CSR's eye, apparently, this was mostly on Bard for making the hit in a maybe not the smartest spot. So it was deemed not goaltender interference because it was a GoldenEye player that caused the collision. And while I haven't had a ton of good things to say about refereeing in the last couple of weeks, I will say I watched this game as we were driving down to New York City. I was watching it in the car as the passenger, don't worry. And I didn't really notice any glaring referee issues. And watching it back the other day to take better notes on it, I didn't notice it then either. I was actually pretty impressed by the refereeing in this game. I specifically want to call out Kiana, I'm sorry, I don't know which way it's pronounced, Murray, referee number 13. I thought she did a great job. I loved the extra communication of when plays were under review, she'd make the box sign, which I've seen a lot in soccer, but you don't see it too much in hockey, at least not that I've ever noticed. She was very clear, very communicative. And again, I didn't see anything super glaring. So for that, in a PWHL game, I have to tip my hat to her and her refereeing partner, Grace Barlow, number 22. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong and there was something absolutely ridiculous that I missed, but I think they were pretty much on the ball. I didn't see any physicality really getting out of hand or anything like that, which would be very expected in a game with this many goals. Both teams are going to be pretty frustrated, both with themselves and with their opponents. So I could really see emotions getting out of hand here, but I think they did a great job in keeping everything pretty even keeled and under control. So hats off to them. Once again, let me know if you felt otherwise. I'm totally open to being wrong, especially considering the caliber of refereeing that we've seen in the last couple of months. But back to the game and the goals. Teresa Vanisheva took a hooking penalty about 50 seconds after the Batherson goal that sent the Frost to the power play. And there are maybe 2 power plays in this league that I genuinely wouldn't want to face once, let alone multiple times. And the top of my list is always the Minnesota Frost. So this was not good for the Golden Eyes, and that proved to be the correct instinct as Taylor Heidi tied the game back up at 4 on the power play thanks to a snipe from the right circle around traffic on the short side. It was a beauty of a shot. From that spot, you would more expect it to be far side as the goalie has committed on the short side, but she found just this smallest bit of space in the top left-hand corner of the goal, and she was bang on there. Despite a Jaguar slashing penalty towards the end of the period, the second period was relatively low in scoring. So we moved on to the third period where Abby Boreen took one of my least favorite penalties. Everyone say it with me, delay of game. Just under 4 minutes in, that sent the Frost to their second power play of the game, which would have me shaking in my skates if I were the Golden Eyes. Kelly Panic is the one with the goal this time. The original shot came from Kendall Cooper, and Panic, as always, was by the net, tipped it right in front of Maschmeyer to change the angle enough to get it by Maschmeyer. A quick note on this tip, it wasn't like Nurses where it was guided with the tip of the stick, anything like that. It wasn't like Nurses with the blade of her stick, maneuvering it like that. No, this was another shot that hit off the shaft of the stick in front of Panic's body. This happened in a Boston game, I think last week. That needed to be reviewed. This one was very clear, under the crossbar. It was, I don't even know, maybe mid-torso, maybe a little bit higher on Panic. And Panic, while she's fairly tall, isn't necessarily the tallest player. So it was pretty clear under the crossbar, not a high stick, just a very lucky bounce for her. And the Frost took back the lead. 12 minutes and 31 seconds into the third period, Michelle Karvonen took a cross-checking minor that led to the third power play of the game for the Frost. Who else but Kelly Panic made their power play 3 for 3 in this game just under a minute later. Once again from her office on the back door, thanks in large part to Lee Steckline, who had a crispy pass through traffic right to Panic, so that Panic had the angle, time, space, and skill to redirect it with like maybe the tiniest bit of wrist movement top shelf over Emmerich Mashmeyer. Now, after all of these goals, Vancouver was, I think, justifiably confident that they could score if they pulled Mashmeyer to go 6-on-5. So with just under 2.5 minutes left in the third period, they did just that. It did take them a while and quite a bit of effort to get there, but Izzy Daniel closed the gap by 1 goal instead of 2 after a really solid effort by Vancouver and plenty of near misses on the 6-on-5. Hannah Miller took a blast from the top of the left circle that Daniel, who was screening Nicole Hensley, got just a tiny tip on to redirect it behind the netminder. Unfortunately for the Golden Eyes, they were unable to make that lightning strike twice, and so the game closed out 6-5 in favor of the Frost. This is truly a barn burner. This is what they mean when they say that. Just so many goals. It's not the highest number of goals we've seen in a single game in the PWHL, but we certainly don't see it very often. So just a crazy game in that respect. If you're looking for a moral of the story from this one, it's do not take penalties against the Minnesota Frost. If you do, you are taking your life and the game into your own hands there, and no one else can save you from that. I don't think either goaltender will love this game for many reasons, stats being the least among them. If I were Hensley or Mashmeyer, I would have some frustrations with the defense in front of me. Both of them were left out to dry more than a dozen times, I would say, both in high danger chances and just like mid danger chances, which despite like the different categories of severity to our like outside perspective, it's still a chance that you don't necessarily want to allow the other team to have on your goaltender. So defense left a lot to be desired, which is kind of the story for Vancouver for a while now. And if you are looking into the Minnesota Frost season at all, I think you'll find it there too. It's just less obvious for them because they always score so many goals that if they allow 3 or 4 per night, like that's not always the end of the world because they can score 6 goals in a game. On this other side, I would say this is the offensive power that Vancouver is fully capable of. Obviously, Sophie Jakes had a lot to do with it, Sarah Nurse and up there as well, but it's nice to see players like Hannah Miller get involved. She had 2 assists, 1 primary. It's nice to see Jen Gardner finally get one. Jen Gardner's obviously a very talented player, but her numbers really haven't reflected that too much this year. Izzy Daniel having just a great year, a great bounce back year after kind of being a little disappointing in her rookie season in Toronto. And of course, my girl, Teresa Vinisheva, I'm so happy to see that she finally got another one. She's another very skilled offensive player who I don't think has been playing anywhere near her potential in Vancouver. For her to get one on the board is a win in my book. And now for the most highly anticipated game for the PWHL front office, but also for a lot of Sirens fans and just general hockey fans, the Madison Square Garden matchup between the Seattle Torrent and the New York Sirens. For those of you who don't know, I live up in Massachusetts, but not too far away from New York. It's a fairly reasonable drive, and my husband and I have friends who live in the New York City suburbs, so we got a group together, took a trip down to the Big Apple with our dog to be a part of history and watch this game in person, and I'm so glad that we did. We had such a great time. Our friends had a great time. Our friends are not necessarily the biggest hockey people. We had one who is a season ticket holder with us, and then the rest who are just kind of either general sports fans or not even really a sports fan, and they all had a blast. As expected, this game broke the U.S. attendance record for women's hockey, 18,006 fans in attendance, and you could definitely hear every single one of them up in the stands. We got through security just before puck drop, maybe a couple of minutes, so we didn't arrive to our the like tunnel to our seats until, I don't know, a minute or two in. And there were no whistles for quite a while in like the first part of the game. And the crowd, even from just like the tunnel there, was almost deafening. I forgot my hearing protection at home in Massachusetts and kind of regretted it, but like in the best way possible. The fans are so passionate, are so into the game that every turnover in favor of the Sirens and every shot and every hit against the Torrent, there were cheers just everywhere. Wee woo chants up the wazoo. The crowd was absolutely, as hockey players will tell you, electric. Once we finally got to our seats, we were witness to a lot of back and forth action. I think New York, for the most part, was pretty dominant. They didn't outshoot the Torrent by much in the first period, 10-7, but it certainly felt like New York were more on their toes while Seattle was more on the heels. And I think the quality of chances were better for New York, but Corrine Schroeder was in net for the Torrent and basically stood on her head for this entire game. What I wasn't expecting was for this game to be super physical, and it was, but it wasn't. There were a lot of solid hits that were clean, but then there were also especially one hit that very much was not and led to some issues. And unfortunately, I do have to credit some of this issue to refereeing. This will come as no surprise to regular listeners or watchers of the PWHL. The initial hit was problematic and should have been whistled immediately. Surprising basically no one, it was not. And so a scrum ensued to near Saulnier on Venisheva levels of scrappiness. The basics of what happened is that Michaela Grant-Mentis had the puck along the wall and sent it away to a teammate approaching the neutral zone. Just after she released the puck, Emmy Fecto came up from the opposite direction, basically lined her up and delivered a brutal body check on Michaela Grant-Mentis. The ref was literally right behind them on this play. It looked to me like he was looking in that direction and not the continuing play up the ice. Maybe that was just my perspective because I was up in the 200 sections, so I was up high. But at the same time, you have to have seen that out of the corner of your eye. That should have immediately put your arm in the air. If not, whistle it dead because Michaela Grant-Mentis was not okay. She was down, seemingly in a lot of pain, definitely disoriented. And understandably, the Torrent took exception to this, especially Aneta Terolova, as she came in to defend her teammate against the couple of Sirens players still in that area, including Fecto. From my vantage point in the moment, to me, this didn't look like head contact, but it absolutely was a body check. It looked to me like Fecto got her shoulder kind of square in Grant-Mentis's chest, like just dead middle is what it looked like to me. And no matter what, that's going to send a player flying, especially as Fecto had more momentum than Grant-Mentis. But even still, Grant-Mentis went down hard to the ice. I don't have like a photographic memory of it. So I want to say that she also like hit the back of her head when she went down in addition to having gotten hit from the front. But don't quote me on that. But again, whatever it was, like it was bad. And I knew immediately it was bad when she dropped the way that she did. Eventually, they did blow the whistle, blow the play dead. Apparently, while this was all happening on the Torrent side of the ice, Hillary Knight had the puck on the Sirens end and actually scored on Kaylee Osborne while this was all going down. I never would have known that if I hadn't rewatched it. Obviously, it was waved off immediately. I don't think the referee on the other side had their arm in the air before that or not, but she definitely immediately was waving it as no goal. This is like the play, again, with New York and Boston, where there was a delayed penalty and it was confused and whatever. I think if this had gotten whistled right away, that goal probably would have stood. And maybe it should have. I don't know. But considering I didn't see it in the moment, it's hard to say. I also don't know if the whistle had blown before it. I didn't hear anything and I didn't see any arms. I know the broadcasters, when I was rewatching it, had said they didn't hear anything. At the end of the day, I don't know what the answer is. But eventually, an arm went up. Fecto went to the box, but then left the ice completely as CSR confirmed it was a major and a misconduct. They called it for a check to the head, which I don't think that was the right call, but at the same time, like, her getting the major and the misconduct was. So I'm not like super upset about that. It was the correct outcome. But in addition to this, Aneta Terlova and Kayla Vespa got matching roughing penalties for the ensuing scrum. And again, something that I never would have seen or appreciated was Terlova throwing a dab while in the penalty box waiting for the review to finish. We couldn't see it in the arena, so it didn't really lighten the mood for any of the fans in person, but on the broadcast, I'm sure it made at least a couple of people smile despite the chaos. But yeah, this was an ugly play, and I'm glad that the outcome was correct in the long term, but I would have liked to see it addressed immediately. Gotta give credit to the Sirens penalty kill unit, as this 5-minute major was killed off very effectively. Unfortunately for them, they were unable to stop Alex Carpenter just after the major expired. Terlova sent the puck from near the blue line to Serdachny behind the goal line. Similar to another play we saw earlier that day, Serdachny sent a crisp pass to Carpenter in the slot, who took a one-timer so big, I think she went down on one knee for it. It just sailed past Kaylee Osborne. I think defense left a lot to be desired in this game as well to certain extents. But this one, the New York defender gave Carpenter way too much room to work with, especially in the slot. Carpenter is always going to make you pay for that. After that whole debacle in the first period that spilled into the second period, and then Carpenter's goal, things kind of settled down a bit. The Sirens had 2 power plays in the second period that amounted to nothing, as the Sirens power play is one of the 6 power plays that are unimpressive at the moment. We saw a lot of back and forth action, but I think for the most part, it still felt like New York had the advantage and was on the front foot, but they just couldn't get that final touch to actually net one and tie it up. And it seemed like hope might be dwindling down to dangerous levels when, in the third period, Fillier took a high-sticking penalty just under 9 minutes in. Thankfully for Sirens fans and most of the fans at MSG, the penalty kill once again did their jobs effectively. Just about 8 minutes after being released from the box, Fillier's line was on a mission. Casey O'Brien, especially the hometown hero who calls New York home, played keep away for a bit in the offensive zone before she sent it to line mate Czerkowski, who was to the right of the net relative to Schroeder. She drew it in even closer to the net before she sent the puck across the slot to Sarah Fillier, who had snuck into the back door and got that easy redirect past Schroeder into the back of the net. MSG erupted. As a pretty neutral fan, I was there for a good time, and good times definitely include the home crowd getting to see a goal, especially from one of their star players. It didn't disappoint whatsoever. And like I said, a lot of credit has to be given to Czerkowski and O'Brien on this play. Sarah Fillier was just there to finish it off, but those two really did a lot of good work in the setup here. This goal absolutely lit a fire under New York. They'd been leading in shots in this period already, but after that, it just seemed like they were sending a barrage at Schroeder at all times. Credit to her, because the Torrent certainly weren't helping her a ton in terms of defense. Schroeder shut them down for the rest of the game. That sent us to overtime. Overtime was another good back and forth matchup, but unfortunately, we didn't see any heroics there, so we went to even more bonus free hockey, a shootout. This was just kind of like a microcosm of this entire game. Just one shooter and one goalie, it feels like, as, defense was kind of not really, not the factor that kept this game so low scoring, I'll say that. New York opted for Seattle to go first, and Wilgren was stopped by Osborne. So when Fillier skated down and got a wrist shot past Schroeder, the fans were stoked. They were a lot less stoked when Alex Carpenter was up next for the Torrent and got one past Osborne. And after that, we saw no goals from Knight, Cherkowski, Serdachny, and Casey O'Brien. But then it was time for the Swedish legend Maja Nilin-Persson, and she got it done past Schroeder. So with the game riding on the end of her stick, Alex Carpenter went back to the dot with hopes of tying it back up and sending it to even more rounds of a shootout. But it was Osborne's moment, and she stopped it, and the Sirens took the win 2-1 in the shootout. A home goal, obviously, is super exciting in a crowd like this, but a home win was even more fun. Just a great atmosphere to be in. As far as the game goes, I would say, and I don't feel that this is a controversial statement, that the only reason the Sirens didn't win by like 5-1 was because of Corrine Schroeder. She was standing on her head. She ended up stopping 38 of 39 shots in the first 3 periods and then the overtime period. Seattle's had a defense problem all season, so this is nothing new to her. But without her, I think if Murphy had been in the net, it probably could have been a 4-1 game. A lot of credit deserves to go to Corrine Schroeder. I'll be perfectly honest and say that I think Schroeder is actually a better goalie than Osborne, but New York did a much better job in limiting the high danger chances. They only had like 4 truly dangerous chances right in front of Osborne, while New York had like a ton. I'm not saying that New York has completely terrible defense. I do think that they had the better defense, but the one goal against where I would put the onus on the defense in that instance kind of overshadows the fact that Osborne wasn't getting nearly as many high danger shots against her. Whatever the case, I think the script for a game as high profile as this is that it had to go to, extra hockey, bonus hockey. It's a bit tongue in cheek, but I do think that having an ostensibly even matchup here was great for the league. While their handling of that big hit wasn't ideal, I also don't think it's like the worst look for the league. So, I mean, they kind of got away with that there. Some personal anecdotes. Like I said, I had some non-hockey friends come with me. One of them was actually a last-minute addition. She didn't know if she was going to be able to make it or not. Her ticket was in a separate section from ours. We all kind of volunteered to sit by ourselves if she didn't want to, but she opted to sit by herself. She's a pretty introverted person, but she said she had a blast. She was sitting behind a couple of fans who were starting chants, leading chants, and not just the standard wee-woo ones, but a couple of other standard like hockey chants, and she enjoyed that. She said she learned a lot and just generally had a good time. So that was great to hear. There was merch everywhere on the concourse. Like there were at least 4 merch spots outside of like the main one. When you got past security, there was a big one. Like even before you went into the like ticketing area, a lot of it sold out. Like second intermission, I want to say that it looks like the one near us had mainly bobbleheads left and maybe a jersey or 2. I imagine in like a less popular size. I didn't see any t-shirts left, especially the MSG specific one. So it seems like merch did really well for the league here. I talked about chants a little bit earlier, but I will say that rewatching it, I don't think the broadcast did them justice to just how loud they were. It was 3/4 of the arena all at once, if not the entirety of the arena. So take what you heard and dial it up a couple of notches, and that was the reality of it. And I think the biggest like cultural moment for the league was the Jumbotron lesbians specifically. Obviously, this league and the league's fan base are very, very queer. There are a lot of all colors of the rainbow represented in the fan base, especially. And nothing highlighted that more than the MSG Jumbotron, where it started with one lesbian couple kissing like towards the start of the game, not even a kiss cam, just like they got on the Jumbotron and they went for it. And that seemed to like open a floodgate I didn't really think existed, but it seemed like every time there was a couple on the Jumbotron, people were kissing and, you know, the crowd was eating it up. They loved it. I have to imagine that it was pre-planned, but there was a heated rivalry cam where they had the remix to All the Things She Said playing with the lyrics on the screen and like a rainbowy background that wasn't opaque. It was like translucent. So they had a camera pointing at people behind it, and they pointed at like exclusively lesbian queer couples. It took it from one plane and sent it on a rocket ship out to space. Like, I could not count the number of queer couples represented on the Jumbotron that night. I could be wrong. I'm sure there are concerts that have happened that are in a similar vein, but I would hazard to guess that that's probably the most queer expressions of love publicly displayed at Madison Square Garden. That would be my guess. One last note on this game is just that the stands stayed pretty full for the entirety of the game, but it did start to thin in the third period and overtime. That is probably due to the fact that this game, for whatever reason, started at 8 p.m. and a lot of trains out of either Grand Central, which is not too far, but like not immediately next to Madison Square Garden, and Penn Station, that's downstairs, leave at 11 or around 11 o'clock, and people wanted to make sure that they could make those trains. Our friends had to take Metro North out of Grand Central, and so their options were either like 11:15 or so or midnight. And since they obviously were having a good time and didn't mind it and didn't have anything to do the next day, they opted to just wait for the midnight train and take that. But a lot of people couldn't do that, or there wasn't a later train, or whatever the case. And so they couldn't afford to stay for the entirety of the game, especially when it officially ended at 10:54 p.m. I don't even think we got out of Madison Square Garden until 11:15. So in my opinion, I think this game should have started at 7. Maybe there's like scheduling reasons why it had to start at 8 with the arena, but I think they could have kept it fuller for longer with a 7 o'clock start. Just me spitballing. But overall, it was incredible to see an 18,000 person crowd for a women's hockey game. I think if they did this a couple of times a season, you could probably sell it out multiple times. Obviously, with scheduling and everything, it's not feasible for the Sirens to move there full time, nor do I think that that's necessarily the right decision at the moment. But I do think that there is interest there, and people have shown that if you make the games more accessible than Connecticut or Long Island or New Jersey, that people will show up, because transit in that area is accessible, but not always convenient, not always like timely. So if you make it accessible to like everybody versus one specific group of people, then more people are going to show up. All right. All of that out of the way, we had 2 days break, the 5th and the 6th. And we got some news on the 6th that is not necessarily what anybody wanted to hear, but seems necessary. The Ottawa Charge released a statement saying that Carla McLeod will be taking a leave of absence to focus on her cancer treatment. Like I said, while this isn't ideal news, especially not for Charge and Charge fans, it is important for her to focus on her health and get healthy there. So personally, I'm wishing her all of the best in her ongoing treatment. I hope that she is able to reach remission. While she's away, assistant coach Haley Irwin will assume the role of interim head coach, effective immediately. On the 7th, just before the Seattle-Montreal game, the Department of Player Safety released a disciplinary action. Emmy Fecto was suspended for 1 game for the hit on Michaela Grant-Mentis. The determination, quoting from the statement, says, "While the head was not the main point of contact, Fecto delivered a dangerous body check with no intent to play the puck when she had ample opportunity to do so, and with sufficient force that warrants supplemental discipline." Once again, I think this is the correct call. I think calling it a body check is much more accurate than calling it head contact, as when you watch the slow-mo replay, you can see that the main point of contact was certainly not the head. but I think the cage did make contact with the shoulder at some point. So it's not like there was no head contact, but she definitely wasn't like head hunting. One game definitely deserved. That was a dangerous check, not one that I want to see repeated by anybody. On Tuesday the 7th, we had the 100th game of the season between the Seattle Torrent and the Montreal Victoire. The first period was relatively uneventful, other than a pane of glass was cracked by, it definitely wasn't a shot because it was next to the bench, so just a clearing attempt, I would guess. There's a couple of funny still images of Desbiens, like maybe holding a ladder or something for the ice crew, which was pretty silly. But yeah, nothing super exciting other than that. Seattle outshot Montreal 6-3, which is interesting, but Montreal came back with a vengeance in the second period. 2 minutes, 28 seconds into the second frame, Natalie Mlinkova got her 5th goal of the season. The play really developed behind the net and to the right of Hannah Murphy in the net as Ljungblom sent it behind her towards the slot area. Alexandra Labelle was the one to touch it, and she tried to make the pass to Mlinkova on the back door, but was getting tied up, and it just kind of struggled to get over there. But when it finally did, Mlinkova got a quick shot off that went bar down behind Hannah Murphy from just outside the crease. Just over a minute later, after Anna Wilbegren took a tripping penalty, Laura Stacey netted her 7th of the season on the power play. Another goal brought to you by Lena Ljungblom, as she is the one to carry it into the zone, had all kinds of time and space to pass to Laura Stacey as the Torrent were caught flat-footed, and Stacey barely had to even touch it to redirect it behind Hannah Murphy. I don't even know why Seattle's defense was caught unaware here on the power play. The Victoire are one of the only teams I would ever really be concerned about this season, and they were a little too lackadaisical for my liking. But like I said in the game against New York, Seattle's defense doesn't impress me, and I don't think it even impresses themselves, so it's not all that surprising. Roughly 6 minutes later, Teresa Chasal cuts the lead in half with her 4th goal of the season. Hilary Knight took a shot that ended up behind the net. She tried again, but instead of it going at Desbiens, it just kind of slid through the crease, and Chasal was in the right place at the right time on the other side of Desbiens to help it over the line. A lot of effort from Knight there, so obviously big credit to her, but Chasal, once again, great positioning, and Seattle fans, this is what I'm telling you. She is a better player than y'all thought she was. Unfortunately for the Torrent, that 2-1 did not last very long, as little over 2 minutes later, Skylar Irving makes it 3-1 with her 3rd of the season. Desbiens passed Flaherty the puck, and she took it just about from one end to the other, all the way behind the goal line next to Murphy. Instead of trying to make magic work for herself, Flaherty sent it behind her to Skylar Irving, and Irving got the quick shot off to go top shelf on Murphy. And yes, for those wondering, that is Anne-Renee Desbiens' first offensive point of the year, her first assist of the season. I don't know if this is her first point ever, but it certainly doesn't happen too often. Again, I feel like I'm just harping on them at this point. Seattle's defense is just lacking, and it makes the job of their forwards much harder, as like they're not the highest scoring team. They have ups and downs where they can score 5 in a night, but they can also get shut out, and it happens, every other night, it feels like. So if they had more consistent, solid defense, I think this score could have been a lot closer, maybe a 2-1 instead of a 4-1. But yeah, I just think that this was a case of a lack of defense facing off some of the best offensive players in the league, and a team with, some would say the best, some would say the second best defense in the league. So it just makes it difficult for Seattle to get anything going offensively when it feels like they're just defending for the most part. And obviously, like, I'm not trying to say that this is all the Torrent's lack of whatever that is the only reason Montreal won. No, Montreal's a very good team. I just don't know how to say that they're a very good team repeatedly without sounding like a broken record. Also on Tuesday night, we had the last Takeover game of 2026 in Edmonton between the Fleet and the Golden Eyes. This was almost a barn burner. It was a barn burner for Boston for sure. Not quite that for Vancouver, but no less a very entertaining game and certainly full of penalties. The crowd for this one was fairly disappointing. I know it was a Tuesday night, but considering Calgary's was a Wednesday night, which is really not that different, 10,000 feels like a very low number. Calgary, I want to say it was like 16 or 18,000. Like they showed up. Just under 6 minutes into the first period, Hannah Miller took a boarding penalty that sent the underwhelming Boston power play to work. It wasn't very underwhelming when Jesse Eldridge seemingly scored, but unfortunately it was overturned by the CSR for goaltender interference. Thompson bumped into Maloney, causing Maloney to bump Maschmeyer, who got knocked over. I wouldn't say it's the most clear case of goaltender interference because Thompson did bump Maloney. Maloney does have like a fair amount of responsibility for where she was, because I think she was like kind of in the crease when she got bumped. So I understand why it was turned over. Definitely aggravating when our power play has looked the way that it does, which is to say terrible. But I couldn't be too disappointed for very long, as maybe 30 seconds later, Eldridge got a goal anyway, despite the fact that the power play expired. This one was a shot from near the line that was blocked by Thompson, but it rebounded right back to Eldridge, who had a lightning-fast snipe that sailed past Emmer's Maschmeyer. Notably, this one was also assisted by Shea Maloney to make up for her interference on Maschmeyer. So there were only 3 penalties in the first period. The first one was that Hannah Miller boarding penalty, but then the other 2 were on Boston, who has been fairly disciplined when it comes to penalties this year. They haven't taken nearly as many as they have in especially last season, but the Fleet penalty kill has been so good that it really hasn't been a concern of mine or a lot of other Fleet fans. So the first one, the interference call on Tapani, was killed very effectively, and the tripping call on Kluge was even better handled, as Megan Keller got her first jailbreak goal of the year, to my recollection. 14 seconds into that penalty kill for the Fleet, I want to say it was Abby Newhook who took the puck all the way to the other end of the ice. Tapani got a shot off that ended up hitting a post and just barely rebounded off of it. Keller was the trailer and just kind of nudged it even closer to like the opening of the net. Maschmeyer was really struggling trying to cover it up, but instead of covering it with her glove like she had intended to, she ended up pushing it over the goal line. Of course, this was reviewed because it looked very strange and potentially maybe there was goaltender interference, but it stood as Keller didn't touch Maschmeyer. There were no Fleet players touching Maschmeyer, and it was Maschmeyer who, put it over the line herself, unfortunately for her. The second period, it was Vancouver's turn for penalties. Izzy Daniel took a tripping penalty a minute and a half into that period, sending Boston back to the power play. Once again, Eldridge got a power play goal, and this one stood. Abby Newhook in the zone with some good touches sent it over to Alina Mueller for a shot that rebounded out to Jesse Eldridge. She took a kind of awkward looking shot, like I said, with a bouncing puck, but it went 5-hole on Maschmeyer. Just a little bit of puck luck here, I think, mixed with Eldridge being lethal on the power play. A bouncing puck like that isn't the easiest for a skater to get a touch on, much less a goaltender, so a bit of puck luck for the Fleet for once. After that, Megan Keller took a holding penalty, and then during that penalty kill, Hannah Miller took another boarding penalty. Later on, Shea Maloney took a rare charging penalty, which was definitely the right call. I'm not sure why she thought that hit was a good idea, especially considering she accidentally got somebody in the head a couple of games previously. I don't know that I would want to take the risk for something like that. But once again, Boston's penalty kill got to work and killed it. And then at 15:46, Susanna Tapani got her 9th goal of the season thanks to Jill Saunier, fresh off of her concussion outage. Once again, Abby Newhook got the puck to Jill Saunier, and Saunier carried it from one end to the other and created a 2-on-1 with Tapani in a masterclass play. Was kind of showing that she was going to make the pass to Tapani for a while, but because it was a 2-on-1, Maschmeyer had to assume that she was going to shoot instead of pass, so she was squared up there. The defender didn't cut off the passing lane, so Saunier had a clear cross-slot pass to the back door for one of Tapani's easiest goals of the year. Shout out to Pingu on the Fleet server for the diagram and breakdown. Sometimes I don't have the words to verbalize why a play worked so effectively, and they broke it down expertly, including screenshots with arrows and stuff, and put words to the impression that I was getting in a way that I wouldn't have been able to. So shout out to them, much appreciated. Not even a minute later, Jamie Lee Rattray got her 4th goal of the season thanks to Sophie Shirley and Hannah Brandt. But this play was set up initially by Rattray herself. Hannah Brandt got a shot off that rebounded. Sophie Shirley got another shot off that rebounded, and that rebound came out to Rattray, who had a beautiful toe drag around Maschmeyer that she made look easy. Rattray's always a super hardworking player, so I was very glad to see her get another one. We had one more penalty to cap off the second period, a delay of game for Karvinen that saw the return of the struggling Boston power play. Before we moved on to the third period, Sophie Jakes was the only one to score in this frame, her 8th of the season, completely unassisted. This was honestly kind of a sick move for Sophie Jakes. She deked Keller and very skillfully avoided Hartmetz's stick before sending a wrist shot 5-hole on Frankel that, unfortunately for Frankel fans, Boston fans, broke Frankel's ridiculous 235-minute shutout streak. Heartbreaking in that sense, but also one of the nicest plays possible to have it broken, so I can only be so mad. And that was it for scoring in this game. We saw 3 more penalties before they called it a night from Brandt and Boreen, both for tripping, and then Rylan McKinnon for body checking in the last 20 seconds. Dare I say this might have been the best offensive performance that Boston has ever had. 5 is our maximum. A power play goal, kind of 2 if you count the one that was overturned. A shorthanded goal, 3 even strength. You just couldn't ask for more from this team. Unfortunately for Vancouver, it was also kind of a sign that their defense was very much lacking. If you look at the shot maps, Boston was all over Maschmeyer a lot of the time. Boston didn't do quite as well as usual on defense in this game. Vancouver snuck in there a couple of times and got some close-up shots on Frankel, but the one Sophie Jakes goal came from inside the left circle relative to Frankel. Like I said, off of some really sick moves. On a personal note, the goal horn in Edmonton at Rogers Place is horrific, and I would personally, if I were involved in the expansion discussions, scratch them off the list just for that alone. God, even for my own team to be scoring so many times, it was horrible to hear every single time. I don't understand how anybody could enjoy that sound. One last note from this game was that Chris Spar was away with his family for this game. As I said last episode, he just had his second child born last week. So it was assistant coach Stephanie McHugh acting as head coach for this game. And she did fantastic. She deserved the water bottle shower she got in the locker room after the game. On Wednesday the 8th, Seattle finally caught a break in Ottawa as they took a much-needed W 5-3. This was a potential elimination game for Seattle, and they certainly played like it was. It did not start off too great for Seattle, though, as Fenuza Kadyrova scored the opening goal a minute and 54 seconds into the first period, her 9th of the season, largely thanks to a rough turnover along the wall. Couldn't even tell you who did it, but it was forced by Markowski and sent to Kadyrova in the left circle relative to Schroeder, and she had a super quick release to go bar down. Just over 13 minutes into that same period, Jada Habish, who signed a SPA very recently, scored her first ever PWHL goal thanks to Megan Carter and Lily Delianidis, who got her first PWHL assist ever. This was thanks in large part to a slap shot from Megan Carter up by the blue line that Habish got a touch on just in front of the crease to get it past Gwyneth Phillips. And this one got me excited as a relatively neutral third-party fan, as Habish is a UConn alum who I watched play against Gwyneth Phillips in the Hockey East Championship in 2024. So very happy to see her in a professional capacity now and to see her score against her former Hockey East rival. There were no penalties in the first period, but the second period seemed to explode with nothing but penalties, starting with Anna Wilgren a minute and 46 seconds into the second period. Luckily, Seattle was doing well on the penalty kill. Ottawa was not doing so well on the power play, and they escaped that one unscathed. In between penalties, Danielle Serdachny got her 5th goal of the season thanks to Julia Gosling. Serdachny forced a turnover behind her own net and took it to the neutral zone, and then the offensive zone. Just as she was crossing into that offensive zone, she passed it to Julia Gosling, who only held on to it for a second before passing it right back. Serdachny deked Phillips and then went 5-hole on her. Definitely the Danielle Serdachny that everybody has been expecting more of. An absolute beauty of a play for her and for Gosling, but obviously Serdachny was the one driving the train here. The second Torrent penalty, Megan Carter for cross-checking, is the one that ended up biting them as Katerina Mrazova got her 2nd goal of the year, somehow only her 2nd, thanks to Gabby Hughes and Rebecca Leslie. Leslie brought it in kind of centrally, left a drop pass from Mrazova behind her, and Leslie drew those defenders away, enough for Mrazova to get a shot off and go bar down on Corinne Schroeder. That's another player who's been seemingly underperforming this year. She's done well in other areas, but has not been on the board nearly as much as you would want or expect her to. There were 3 more penalties in this period, none of them effective on anything, but the real star of the show, especially in this frame, well, there were several stars of the show. There was a nice couple who was having their wedding reception at the Charge game, which is brilliant and really funny at the same time. I would have never thought about it, but it would be something that I would do. And since it's so notable, Rob Pizzo, the in-arena reporter for this game, interviewed them and then, joined in the party. He was caught giving a toast. We don't know what was said, but he was raising a glass and everyone else was as well. Well, a cup. And obviously leading a toast. And then the camera caught him a little while later as part of a conga line. So Rob Pizzo really stealing the show in between the action. I know there's going to be mixed feelings on it, but personally, I love that stuff. I don't know that I'll ever be mad at people having a good time like that. Especially since the couple seemed cool with it. Like, all good by me. I love it. 2 minutes, 2 seconds into the final frame of this game, Danielle Serdachny had to do it again. Lindy Lobdell got the puck over to Serdachny, and Serdachny just kind of put the whole team on her back, brought it in the offensive zone by herself into the right circle relative to Phillips, and then sniped around an Ottawa defender past Gwyneth Phillips. Some really slick, sick moves. Just under 9 minutes into the same period, Gabby Hughes tied it back up after Emily Clark forced a turnover in the neutral zone and sent a wonky pass over to Peyton Hemp. Hemp didn't get much of a touch on it, and it ended up continuing on to Gabby Hughes. Hughes took it in stride, deked a Seattle defender, and then deked Schroeder to backhand it up and in. I think Hughes saw her former teammate with some sick moves and said, I can do that too. It was looking like we were going to overtime for a lot of this period. Almost 8 minutes went by with no scoring when Emily Clark took a hooking penalty that sent Seattle to the power play. If there are teams that I wouldn't mind taking a penalty against, Seattle would be one of them. Unfortunately, that gamble would not pay off if I took it in this game, as unlikely hero Natalie Snodgrass has an incredible snipe to get the lead. It did come after some good chances for Ottawa at jailbreaks, but instead, the puck came out and bounced in between Julia Gosling's skates. She kicked it up to her stick, carried it through the neutral zone. As she crossed into the offensive zone, she passed it over to Snodgrass to her left, and Snodgrass went for a snipe that went over a sliding defender and over Gwyneth Phillips. Absolute beauty of a play, only Snodgrass's second goal of the year, the secondary assist also being Gabrielle David's first assist of the year. Notably, Snodgrass is another UConn alum. The Huskies really taken over this game over another former Husky of a different variety in Ottawa's net. Understandably, Ottawa was under pressure to tie the game back up and send it to overtime, especially if they wanted to claw their way into that last playoff spot. But the Torrent held fast as Gwyneth Phillip left the net. So well, in fact, that Kayla Barnes, of all people, got her second goal of the year on an empty netter. A really solid performance by the Torrent. I think there's still a lot to be desired in many areas, defensive especially. But the same could be said for Ottawa. If you look at the shot map, both teams had a very high number of chances in the high danger areas. Neither goaltender, I'm sure, feels particularly good about this game. But at the end of the day, both teams were fighting for something, and it was a very entertaining game to watch. So Seattle lived to fight another day, and Ottawa is still in the hunt for that last playoff spot. On Saturday the 11th, the PWHL decided it would be a great idea to have another triple header, starting with New York visiting Minnesota, where it was a rough day for the Sirens. Roster-wise, they were still without Kaltunkova on injury, when it seems at this point that it might be season-ending. And since Fecto was on a one-game suspension, Dale Ross got the nod for this game. This is another game that goaltender may not feel great about, specifically Osborne, as she turned the puck over behind the net. It ended up on the stick of Grace Zumwinkle, who's always going to have incredible snap decision-making capabilities. So she sent it up to Lee Steckline for a massive blast from the blue line for Steckline's second goal of the season. 41 seconds later, though, New York ties it back up from another defender. Krishova had the puck in the right circle and was drifting towards the net before she passed it to Micah Zandyhart behind her. Zandyhart threw what looked like a fairly innocent snapshot to me all the way from the blue line, and somehow it weaved its way through traffic to end up in the back of the net behind Maddie Rooney. Her first of the season somehow. Obviously, she's a pretty stay-at-home defender, not known for her scoring prowess, but I would have expected her to have scored by now. That's the end of the scoring for the first period of this game, but it got really chippy, and I don't know that the officiating was at its best for this period, but the refs did, talk to both teams and seem to say, hey, knock it off, calm down, whatever the case is, to try to rein it back in. And it did for the most part. The second period only had a holding penalty and a slashing penalty, one for each team. Nothing too crazy, nothing that really stood out to me, especially not before the third period where the scoring started up again. A Kristen O'Neill slashing penalty sent the most formidable power play to work, and it took them just over a minute to break the tie, making it 2-1. Mae Batherson sent a pass to Britta Curl. Britta Curl sent it to Abby Hustler across the slot for a pretty easy redirect on the back door for Abby Hustler's 4th of the season. 30 seconds later, Taylor Heisey took a high sticking penalty that maybe would have cheered New York up if they were able to capitalize on that penalty. Unfortunately, they could not. Heisey exited the box and 30 seconds later scored her 11th goal of the year. Sydney Morin sent a pass from their defensive zone to Heisey in the neutral zone. Heisey brought it in down the right wing all by herself and snapped a shot over Osborne short glove side. Very similar to a goal she scored in her previous game, I think just on the opposite side. Unfortunately, there was more shenanigans that unfolded in the third period just after we thought that the chippiness had gone down in this game. Micah Zandy Hart came at Katie Knoll from just about a 90-degree angle and caught Knoll's cage with her shoulder. I didn't find it malicious. I don't think Zandy Hart's that player, but it definitely was a really, really dumb angle of approach. Not at all a hockey play. So the head contact I would find incidental, but if it were just a body check and no head contact was made, I would still consider that to be a major penalty. The arm went straight up, as I recall, but since the Frost had the puck, they continued up the ice, and Himlarova was skating in the offensive zone when she got sandwiched in between Maddie Wheeler and Maya Nielan-Persson. This one in particular, I thought was incidental and not dirty. I think it was a really unfortunate outcome, as Himlarova actually ended up staying on the ice for a lot longer than Katie Knoll did, despite the fact that I thought Himlarova's looked less serious almost. But that being said, I think she's also been taking a beating recently. Again, I don't think that anybody's targeting anyone specifically, at least not maliciously. More skilled players are going to be defended more aggressively, like all the time, and that's not the same as targeting. But Himlarova just seems to be getting the short end of the stick a lot, whether it's, taking a bad hit where it was a poor decision by the opposing player, or if it's just an incidental incident like this. She's been going through it, so I really hope that she's okay. Knoll got back up pretty quick and didn't seem any worse for wear, so I'm glad that she seems okay. Obviously, I don't want to see anybody hurt, and this is... So, in the end, Zandy Hart got a 5-minute major and a misconduct for a check to the head, understandably, and no other punishments were doled out for Wheeler or Nielan-Persson. I don't think that there was a penalty in there. Sorry, Frost fans. But like I said, I really hope that she's okay and she's not out for any length of time. I do believe she was done for the game, but I don't think we've heard anything since. I gotta give credit to the Sirens. They did very well to effectively shut down the Minnesota power play for the entirety of that major penalty. Unfortunately, they were unable to get their offense going to get back in the game and ended up conceding an empty net goal to Britta Curl. What it really came down to was the goaltenders in a lot of ways. Maddie Rooney has shown that she's a world-class goaltender. She has an Olympic gold medal for a reason. Like, she's a very, very good goalie. And I think that was the real difference here, because New York, I think, actually, just by the eye test on the shot map, had more quality chances in front of Rooney. But obviously, with the end score, she made it more difficult for the Sirens to get behind her. On the other side, Minnesota's high danger chances were all to the right side of Osborne for the most part, which was a very strange thing to see. That would make me have to really watch it back to figure out why that is, whether it's a case of one side just being better defended, or whether that right side, I guess the left side for Minnesota, just has that many more weapons. And there's also the obvious that Minnesota just has more players who are almost guaranteed to score in a game. So in the end, I'm not completely surprised by the outcome of this. But the outcome of this game did have implications for the Seattle Torrent. Funny enough, if the Sirens had won, they would have been mathematically eliminated from playoff contention. Since Minnesota won pretty handily, they once again lived to fight another day. The second game of Saturday the 11th started an hour after the first one, so I was only half watching this the first time, had to watch the last half of it the next day. Ottawa visiting Toronto at the Coca-Cola Coliseum. For the first time in what feels like forever, Sani Ahola was back to backing up Gwyneth Phillips in net, finally back on the active roster. And for Toronto, they had to put Ali Monroe on the LTIR back on the 8th of April, which meant that Hannah Baskin got re-signed to a contract. Having watched the first period kind of at the same time as watching the Frost Sirens game, nothing really stood out to me. Obviously, it seemed that it was fairly heavy in one direction, but I didn't realize how heavily that appeared on the game sheet until the second time I watched it and glanced at the game sheet. And yeah, the first period ended with Ottawa having 6 shots on net and Toronto having 19, which is bonkers when you think about, sometimes an entire game, a team will only have 19 total shots on net. With that number, I can't say that Ottawa's defense was perfect, but considering the damage that could have been done, I think they were fairly good at limiting the number of really, really high danger chances in front of the net. At the end of the game, I think there were only 7 in and around the crease, which is pretty good for, the high volume of shots. Not the worst thing for Gwyneth Phillips. I think she thrives on being engaged in the game, but not the start that you would want if you were Ottawa. No goals and no penalties in the first period, so it felt like the second period had to be somewhat more entertaining. And it kind of was. 36 seconds in, Catherine Riley took a penalty. Nothing on that, so 8 minutes later, when Shelbin took a tripping penalty, thought maybe this is where it picks up. Nope. 3 minutes later, Vita Poniatowskaya took an interference penalty. Maybe on that one. Nope. 16 seconds after, Blair Turnbull took an interference penalty. So maybe 4-on-4 there'd be a little bit of action. Maybe somebody'd score on that. No. And then 2 minutes after the 4-on-4 completely expired, Toronto bench took a too many players on the ice penalty. So, maybe now's the time for Ottawa to get on the board. No. Third period, something's bound to give. There's no way that this game goes all the way to overtime without anyone scoring a goal. This isn't playoff hockey. And I wasn't completely wrong, but it wasn't exactly the time frame I would have expected. 3 minutes, 14 seconds in, Renata Fast took a holding penalty, and not even a minute later, Daryl Watts took a tripping penalty, which had Ottawa 5-on-3. They had to have scored on that, right? No. Not even 30 seconds later, Sarah Wisniewicz took an interference penalty, which sent it to 4-on-3. Nothing. We did eventually see a goal, though. 11 minutes, 20 seconds into the third period, Rebecca Leslie forced a turnover basically right on top of Kirk that had Jenner scooping up the loose change and sending 5-hole. It had to have been something like that, something very opportunistic to break this tie from either end. Of course, if I thought it was going to be Ottawa, my money would have been on Rebecca Leslie and Brianne Jenner no matter what. But considering shots on net, I don't know that I would have said it would be Ottawa in the first place. Although when you're facing Gwyneth Phillips in net, it is very hard to actually get one past her, so maybe I shouldn't be that surprised. Before the game was through, we had a officiating blunder that has everyone kind of scratching their heads. It makes for a kind of silly gif, but I can only say that because it seems that nobody's actually hurt. But it leaves me wondering how nobody saw it. I get that the play had moved away from it at the time, so maybe the refs just weren't looking, but holy cow, it was not subtle whatsoever. LaRock decided that she was going to test out some WWE-style wrestling moves behind the net on her, I thought was good buddy Renata Fast. LaRock pinned her up against the boards initially to let her teammate pull the puck from Fast's possession. But then once the puck is out of there, LaRock goes low, grabs Fast kind of around the waist and legs, pulls her legs kind of out from under her, and then puts her down on the ice back first. I say puts her on the ice like it wasn't a slam. I actually think it was fairly nonviolent, all things considered. She wasn't lowering her to the ice. She was putting her there like decisively, but like, holy cow, that was not legal whatsoever. I wouldn't be surprised if there's later disciplinary actions from this because wholly illegal. But at the same time, I will grant LaRock that this was not incredibly violent. It looked relatively gentle. It was fairly controlled and slow, whereas she could have just, swept the legs, slew foot style, and slammed her to the ground like that. And I don't think Fast hit her head on the ice when she went down. Like, it seemed like it was slow enough that she was able to, like, control her neck and head enough so that it didn't, like, slam down. But yeah, that was just completely out of pocket. I don't know what LaRock was thinking. With Toronto fighting Ottawa for that last playoff spot, obviously Toronto's going to throw everything they have at Ottawa to tie it back up and send it to overtime. So they end up pulling Kirk with like a minute and a half left, only to have Sarah the Waz score an empty net goal on them, making the final score 2-0. And that is a 42 save shutout for Gwyneth Phillips. It kind of goes without saying here that if Phillips were any worse of a goaltender, Toronto could have easily won by a landslide here. 42 shots on goal is a lot. Toronto was just a stronger force offensively than Ottawa was defensively. And, Ottawa has the better goalie. No offense to Reagan Kirk, but Gwyneth Phillips is similar to Desbiens and Frankel, just on a different level of existence in the net. So with that, the Charge overtake the Scepters in that 4th place spot. It doesn't clinch them in that spot, but it does give them the advantage for now, and it's going to depend on how the last couple of games of the year go down for both teams to determine who's getting it. Finally, the reason that I had to rewatch the 2nd and 3rd period of the Ottawa-Toronto game was because the Boston Fleet were playing the Montreal Victoire at TD Garden in Boston. This was not quite as highly touted and highly anticipated as Madison Square Garden, unfortunately for Boston fans. Madison Square Garden is just like a global name, while the TD Garden is much more US, especially East Coast US kind of landmark. That's still nothing to sneeze at, as it was a complete sellout to capacity of 17,850 fans, all there to see the Fleet and the Victoire battle it out. I think, personally, if we had the same number of seats as Madison Square Garden does, we could have matched, if not outsold them. As expected, it was a very defensive matchup, and it was going to be one slip up, one error away from making the difference one way or the other. And that's exactly what happened in this game. Let me preface this by saying that I did double check with some non-Boston third-party neutral fans just to make sure that I wasn't losing my mind with bias. I'm not blinded by the bias that I have in this game. But from the start, this officiating was just garbage. Absolute garbage. And I'll start off by saying there was a missed call on Boston, like a penalty committed by Boston that went uncalled, that I really think set the tone for the entire game and put a terrible taste in my mouth. I can't even remember who did it, but Abby Rock got body checked kind of near the benches, kind of near the Victoire bench, very early on in the first period. I literally said out loud to my husband next to me, I'm shocked that that was not called. I'm shocked that wasn't a penalty. And still, I have no idea why it wasn't. I don't know if it wasn't seen. I don't know if they just decided the physicality was going to be the trademark of this game. But whatever it was, like I said, set the tone for this entire game, and things got out of hand quickly. It's quite honestly a miracle that nobody got seriously hurt and nobody took a major penalty here because it could have gotten really bad. So just a sampling of missed calls that they had between the first period, first puck drop, and the only goal of this game. Mueller got boarded while the Fleet were on a power play. I believe this was on the Dara Gregg tripping penalty. Mueller got boarded and there was no call. Fortunately, when Kluge got boarded by LaBelle not too long later, that one was called. So what's a board, what's not a board, unclear from the first period. Second period, there were some, I'm pretty sure it was late in the first, maybe early in the second, that Jill Saunier got tripped, textbook trip, stick under skate, coming down like center ice basically, no call. She had the puck. Why was that not a trip? And then after that, I don't remember who had the shot. Maybe it was Scheppers, maybe it wasn't. Close enough that it caused kind of mayhem in the crease. This one was with 3 minutes, 6 seconds remaining in the first period. Desbiens, I didn't have it covered at first, so there were Boston players kind of hacking at it. Desbiens covers. Stacy gets her arm around Liz Scheppers' neck and puts her in a headlock. No call. In fairness to the refs here, I think there was a lot happening in the moment, but the fact that she had to uncurl her arm around Scheppers' neck as they were climbing up from on top of Desbiens, because, yeah, the other part of this was that Stacy hauled Scheppers down to the ice in a headlock. Nothing? We're just not going to acknowledge that? We're just not going to talk about that. We're not going to maybe have a conversation about putting other people in headlocks? Apparently not, because later on, second period, I'm pretty sure somebody on Boston got their arm around a Victoire player's neck. No call? It's my team, but I don't want people in headlocks. I don't want to see anybody getting their head or neck hurt because of stupidity that was not reined in initially by the refs. I don't want anybody in a headlock. I don't want to watch wrestling. I want to watch hockey. The first set of matching minors came 5 minutes, 39 seconds into the second period. This one started as the Victoire were crashing the net on Frankel, as you do. Peshova was covering Stacy, who was coming on the backside of Frankel, so she was facing the opposite direction. Peshova kind of pushed Stacy back in a way, and Stacy had just launched herself at Peshova, which led to a full scrum around Frankel. At the end of it, somehow, it was Jade Downey-Landry and Riley Bregman who took the matching roughing penalties. And I'm not sure where they arrived at that figure. Maybe it was just the last two that they had to pull off of each other, but I don't think that was the right decision at all, but whatever. Later in that same period, Haley Skimura hip-checked Huber into the Victoire bench, basically. Huber went after Skimura. They got into it. Walking away from that, Skimura got a roughing penalty. Ella Huber got a roughing penalty and a cross-checking penalty. And then the Victoire took a too many players on the ice penalty during that whole debacle at 18:29. It was just a mess. And part of Huber, really going after Skimura in that moment was because players were just feeling that the game needed to be policed themselves and the referees were doing nothing to help the safety of the game. So they had to take matters into their own hands. And I'm not defending Huber here. You can't just launch yourself at somebody because you got hip checked into the boards. But I can understand why you would feel the need to defend yourself and step up like that in a game like this. I will say, though, in the third period, things did seem to get better. Not that there were more calls, but it seemed that maybe the teams just kind of decided that they were going to be more civil to each other. I'm not really sure. There was only one penalty on Laura Stacey for tripping. I don't remember anything being super egregious. I know a lot of people in the stands were upset about a hit thrown by Erin Ambrose in the dying minutes of the game. But having seen it fairly close to where I was sitting, as I recall, it was pretty clean. I didn't have an issue with a non-call there. I know a lot of people around me did. As a fan, I can totally understand it. in the third period was where the lines people really started to lack in my eyes, especially in the third period. And there might have been one or two examples in the first two periods that I could excuse away. But the third period, there was a weirdly high number of icings that were either not called or non-icings that were called as icing. And that's just another layer to the how is anybody supposed to know how to play this game if the rules that are set out before the game starts, before the league started, are not being abided by, are not being called? Especially like the icings one, it's like, what do you have to do? Take it all the way down into the zone yourself to not get called for an icing? Like, the rule is the red line at center ice. I saw pucks be thrown in between that and their offensive blue line be called icing. Like, what are we doing here? You have one job that has two responsibilities. One of those is to call icings and wave off icings that are not icings. The other job is to call offsides, which I think was done decently, to my recollection. Like I said, a lot of this, I think, influenced the way that the players played, the way that the game was played. Another factor of how this game played out in terms of like what you were watching was it seemed that the Fleet especially, and I'm sure the Victoire as well, but obviously I'm going to watch my team with more scrutiny, were missing passes and having pucks bounce on them in ways that seemed to really surprise the players. Somebody in the Discord suggested that it's possible they weren't able to practice in TD Garden before the game because the Bruins played in it earlier in the day. Like, the Bruins had like an 11 o'clock game that day. So they wouldn't be able to like feel out the boards or the ice surface or anything like that, which I think would make sense. Obviously, it negates any kind of home ice advantage, if that's something that you believe in, that Boston would have. Not that I think one practice would have solved all of the problems that it seemed Boston was having, but it also could have limited the number of times Boston seemed surprised when a pass off the wall bounced in a weird way or didn't go as far as they thought it was going to, or the ice surface itself was different than they're used to. I don't know, not having been on the ice, I can't really say if it was like a different texture or anything like that, but it is possible. And obviously, if Boston wasn't able to practice on the ice, neither was Montreal. So it washes out any advantage completely. As I said up top, it was always going to be a defensive goaltending duel. That's exactly what it was. And it was going to be a coin flip on kind of who blinked first almost. Boston blinked. 5 minutes, 52 seconds into the third period, Lena Ljungblom got her fourth goal of the season, the only goal in this entire game, thanks to Laura Stacey and Nicole Gosling. Stacey came out of the box and almost immediately received a pass from Nicole Gosling, basically right at the center red line. Laura Stacey charged into the offensive zone with, I think it was Abby Rock. Riley Bregman was limiting Stacey's chance to take a shot on Frankel, while Ella Huber was randomly on defense, pretty much blocking the passing lane. Neither of them were blocking the trailer, and Lena Ljungblom down the middle. Hannah Brandt was just a step behind her, so Stacey's pass to Ljungblom was uncontested, and Ljungblom had basically an easy one-time blast from just about dead center slot that beat Frankel. Obviously, very skilled play for Montreal, so I'm not taking away from that, but I do think that Boston was on their heels more for this play, probably having been on the power play, the brutally terrible power play that I couldn't stand to watch at all that night. I think they were tired from that, and so Brandt being a step behind was just because she couldn't like force herself any faster. That's just a speculation in theory. Maybe it's just me telling myself that to feel better, but just a series of fortunate events for the Victoire and unfortunate events for the Fleet. Like I said, the Boston power play was so terrible that I really wanted to put my head through a wall for the whole game. Like, I really didn't watch much of the power plays. I had to look away because it was just so infuriating. Towards the end, when the fleet pulled Frankel, it was like nobody wanted to take that last shot. And considering the fact that, they weren't getting that last touch on it the entire game, they were missing passes and everything like that. It was just so infuriating to watch them even be scared to try. Obviously, you don't want to give up the empty netter, but at that point, like, it's either, you could score on the 6-on-5 by taking all of the shots that you can, or you could give up an empty netter and, nobody gets more points than they would have if it was 1-0. So, yeah, it was just tough to watch. All things considered, I think this game was a solid matchup. I know a lot of people would find it boring as it was so defensive. I think Boston could have several games at TD Garden and do well. I don't know that they would sell it out every single game in a 32-game season, but I am looking forward to going back to the Garden multiple times in next season, hopefully, as it is just so much more fun with more people around. My last takeaway for this game is back to officiating, and I'm really not done complaining about it. I don't know that I ever will be when number 14, Jared Cummings, is still refereeing in this league. It's no secret that most referees are part-time PWHL. A lot of them are reffing the NCAA, but even more are reffing the AHL and ECHL men's hockey leagues. And the rules for men's hockey are so vastly different from the PWHL, especially when it comes to penalties, that it does not surprise me at all that Jared Cummings lets a lot of body checking go when he absolutely shouldn't. And that's how pretty much every single game that he's ever reffed comes out to. A broken clock can be right twice a day. He's had some decent games in terms of like getting hard calls correct. But every time he's on the ice, especially in a Boston game, I dread it. I dread the entire game. Truly, it feels like every single game he's on the ice for is called like diseased dog water. Somebody's going to get giardia from drinking that. Will cutting him out and sending him to men's hockey only solve the entire PWHL reffing problem? No, but it would be a good first step. If anybody in the league is listening to me, take a look at his track record of games and tell me that I'm wrong. Tell me there are not uncalled body checks in like every single game that he's reffed, or at least the vast majority of them. And again, to any league officials who are listening for some reason, do not spend money on 4 expansion teams this year. Spend money on 2 expansion teams and then pay the referees and the lines people what they deserve to ref and officiate for the PWHL full time. And for God's sake, do not hire Jared. He needs to stay in the AHL, ECHL, wherever he came from. This cannot go on. It really can't. Somebody's going to get hurt. The players don't want like full on open ice hits. And that's what we're getting. And nobody knows how to play it because that's not in the rule book. And that's causing problems. All right. So I think with that off my chest, I think that's going to be it for this week. I hope you had a good time listening to the Garden games. Both nights were very special, and I am so glad I was a part of both of them. As always, remember that you can send me your hot takes, your predictions. Let me know who you think is going to be the last one in playoffs. iceearnpod@outlook.com. I also want to shout out my 2 Patreon supporters. Slowly but surely paying off that microphone. If you want to join the Patreon, you can go to the link in the description of each episode. You can also join for free and just show that you support the show. There isn't a free option. All right, that is it for me. I need to stop yapping and drink some water. You should too. I'll catch you all on the next one. Thanks so much for listening. Make sure that you're subscribed on your preferred platform. You can also follow me on social media. You can find it at iceearnpod pretty much everywhere. If you want to support the show monetarily, feel free to check out the merch store linked in the description below, or join us on Patreon at patreon.com/iceearnpodcast. If you want to join the conversation on Discord, there is a link for that in the description as well. Shoot me an email at iceearnpod@outlook.com. And until next time, be kind to each other.